And to start it off, I would like to introduce Yavi Madurai, all the way from South Africa. She will be the moderator for the first session, and she will go ahead and introduce her panelists as they discuss the opportunities, like I said, women in trade and sustainability. So welcome, Yavi. I hope you can hear me, Yavi.
I can. There we go. Thank
Great.
you, Anne.
So
Thank
welcome,
you.
and carry on with the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for having all of us. But it's just been an amazing, I was on with Anne yesterday as a panelist. So I know that it was kick-started off with you know, some amazing discussion, and I'm assuming that there's been a lot of discussion. Sorry, I'm running around Morocco at the moment. So it's been quite an interesting couple of days. But I want to welcome all of you to Unlocking the Potential for Women to Trade Sustainably. As Anne said, I'm Yavi Madurai. I'm the Executive Director of PABWA, and I'm the co-founder of the African Prosperity Fund. My focus for the last couple of years has been about women in trade, specifically under PABWA. We're a think tank for economic transformation of Africa through its women and youth. So obviously this is right up my alley. So when we look at it, in terms of, I'm going to introduce you to my wonderful panelists in a second, but I just kind of want to set the scene for all of you in terms of unlocking the potential for women to trade sustainably and from a long-term and growth and scaling perspective. You know, women entrepreneurs we have the most number of women entrepreneurs in Africa from anywhere else in the world. And they are the significant actors of the trade agenda in Africa, but not necessarily recognized as such. And I think this is where everything starts and this discussion point begins. Hundreds of thousands of women cross the border in Africa every single day to deliver goods from areas where they are relatively cheap to areas in which they are in shorter supply. Yet policymakers typically overlook women's participation in trade, and especially the challenges that they face, or we would have a better situation for women in trade. The challenges and issues are an opportunity for creating global solutions, because it's not only in Africa that women in trade are experiencing some of these issues. They are magnified in Africa, obviously, because the number of women that are experiencing it and the extent to which women make up the informal trade sector in Africa is massive. At last count, we kind of got to a number of about 80% in terms of approximate figures. And women's issues in the trade sector, though, have the potential to change the dynamics of the trade activity in Africa, but even in the world, purely because if we fix some of the issues, they will be able to scale and grow their businesses. And if they are scaling and growing their businesses, it stands to reason that the economic growth of that region, the economic growth of those countries, will also be able to grow. So when we look at it, understanding and taking women's issues into account and dealing with it will actually have a positive effect on every single country and every single region. In August of 2022, which is about 2-3 months ago, PABWA was the first organization to submit to the AFCFTA Secretariat a fully researched and developed policy brief on the Women and Youth in Trade Protocol. Our learnings from the policy brief tells us that while the AFCFTA absolutely, and I'm an advocate of the AFCFTA, I'm known as Miss AFCFTA actually, so I'm always talking about it, presents the silver lining to Africa's trade woes and our economic growth and all of the post-COVID issues that we're having to deal with. And are specifically looking at it from a full value chain perspective in terms of Africa not having a significant one. So if we do not fully activate the potential of the AFCFTA, it could be a double-edged sword for women and youth in trade, possibly creating new and unexplored issues for women involved in trade. And this is what we found from the research and in terms of developing the policy brief. The prospect of intra-Africa trade being magnified could simply mean that the challenges and constraints are also magnified if we do not activate with intention and strategic mindfulness. So we do need to be fastidious in how we approach the implementation of the AFCFTA of Women in Trade. In this particular panel today, and I'm going to introduce you to each of they're going to introduce themselves because they are each specialists in what they do. If we don't do some of these things, but also there are some of the things that we need to be able to do. So let's look at the ways that women participate in trade in Africa, the constraints that they face, and the impact of those constraints. This platform now gives us the opportunity as trade experts in terms of my panel to present, new and innovative ideas and solutions. So let us have the discussion. I want us to be able to walk away from this having come up with some wonderful innovative ideas and having a discussion about that. With that in mind, I want to introduce our panel. And each of them are going to introduce themselves because they would know, more than I ever would in terms of some of the stuff that they are busy with and some of the spectrum of work that they want to be able to look at. So without much further ado, I'm going to call on each one of them to introduce themselves and just give us a particular perspective on where they come from, who they are, but also what is the game changer for them in terms of how we take this challenge up and how we drive it forward from an Africa perspective. So I'm going to start with Phylis. Phylis, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, just depending on where in Africa you come from. Hello, Phylis, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours, my queen, with the proper African poof. We shall hand the floor over to you.
So my name is Phylis Wanjiru Mwangi. At best, I describe myself as an entrepreneur. I run an e-commerce store based in Kenya that runs global. It's called Tandao Commerce. Done that since 2012. And above all, I'm a consultant. I'm a consultant for corporates. I train corporates on productivity skills such as customer care, team building. Also at EdgeConsult, we deal with women. And I'm really struggling because of the echo. Maybe I'm hearing myself and just getting a bit confused. And then finally, I work with International Trade Center as a consultant for She Trades. Okay. So may I ask to be removed and then I come back in for that feedback to...
Yes, I think so. So maybe just go backstage and then come back again.
Yeah,
sure.
Sorry.
Thank you, Phylis. But thank you. Welcome.
Okay.
Ms. Susan Baka, welcome.
Thank you, Yavi. I bring greetings from Canada very, very early in the morning here. So I've spent many years in the women entrepreneur space, particularly with women in international trade. One of the founders of the first Canadian chapter of the Organization of Women in International Trade. But I'm here today in my role as a regional representative for the Trade Facilitation Office Canada. And TFO Canada's mandate is to confront the challenge of global poverty. And how do we do this? Well, by helping exporters in Africa, Asia, and Latin America access the Canadian markets through sharing our trade expertise and connecting SMEs with Canadian buyers. I call it Canada's best kept secret. SMEs can tap into valuable and free information about the Canadian market through our website, and everything from market trends and regulatory info to answers to questions like, how do I find Canadian buyers? To accessing over 20 sector-specific market information papers with great detail about the Canadian market, and on topics like everything from coffee, apparel, food, and many, many more. So SMEs can register to be part of our exporter database that Canadian buyers and importers search when they're looking for new sources of supply. And remember, this is all free because we're funded by the Canadian government. So you can just go to www.tfocanada.ca to register as an exporter. We also work with trade support institutions in market to help them provide export readiness training to SMEs. And we have a particular focus on capacity building of women-led SMEs through specific projects in Africa, which will be of particular interest to this audience.
Thank you, Susan. I'm going to go and register myself. Well, my business, but yes, I'm also going to go and do that. So thank you for letting us know. I'm going to ask Denise if she can then just put that up onto the chat so that we can have it. I'm sure there's going to be questions about, how can people access it, or they missed it, or whatever the case is. So let's put it onto the chat if we can. But thank you and welcome. I'm looking forward to our discussion, especially how we partner with Africa from your perspective. And then, as I was saying, the rose amongst the thorns, Mr. Caspar Pedo, please, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Yavi. And yes, it's indeed a privilege to be among women in this conversation. It's really amazing. So yeah, so thank you so much. So so at this point, Caspar is, I'm a development practitioner for over 17 years and currently working for Fairtrade Africa as the head of region for East and Central Africa Network. Now, at this point, I'm here in capacity as a Fairtrade staff, and certainly to share with you the wealth and the richness of working with Fairtrade. Well, Fairtrade as a name, obviously, we are advancing the values and principles of fair trade, and a lot more in promoting sustainable and equitable trade and production, mainly from the agriculture value chain producers. And I'm talking about initially much more with export focus on the global north. Now we're sort of shifting a little bit, expanding the market, and we're saying, well, the growth, particularly among African consumers, with a strength on middle class growing really well. We're hoping that we can also, continue building up on that and focusing on ethical consumption and responsible consumption, and ensuring that the producers are able to secure market as well in the global south. Now, Fairtrade is a system. So Fairtrade Africa is a member of Fairtrade International. At Fairtrade Africa, we are representing up to about 1.3 million producers and workers. And when I talk about producers and workers, I mean producers that we have, those that have actually been divided into what we call small producer organizations, mainly comprising smallholder farmers. And these ones are organized into cooperative societies and cooperative unions. And then we have the so-called the hired labor sector, much more in the in the big plantation agriculture. We promote equitable and sustainable trade through voluntary standards, which are much more focusing on social and environmental requirements. But again, much more we are looking deep into the market and what we call fairly slightly higher prices for our commodities that are under, call it fair trade mark. And we're saying, well, the slightly higher prices come back, a portion of it in form of premium, which also is put into social and economic development of the communities from where the production happens. I think that would be about it.
Thank you, Caspar. Thank you so much. I love, obviously, from a fair trade perspective, in terms of East Africa, it's always been something that I put on my agenda to be able to see what you are doing and how you are driving that agenda, because we talk so much about the AFCFTA. So we speak about the F as in being free trade, but we also need to always take into account the F standing for fair trade, and how we are going to start to drive that agenda more and more as time goes by, that it's not only organizations like yours that are doing it, but that we are taking into consideration every time or when we start to create products and value chains in Africa on a more grander scale. So thank you and welcome to all of you. I had asked you to all have the first question, and it was a bit of a question to get us all going and to have us kind of look at it from different perspectives, but it was all of you work with women in trade across various spectrums. So I'm always interested to understand what are some of your challenges, what are some of the challenges that you are hearing about and seeing on the ground, and at all levels and in different ways. But and this question is obviously for all three of you to answer from your various perspectives. So if I can please start with Susan. And well, you're going to give me the answer, but all of you have the same question, in that if you could change one thing in the trade sector or in the trade agenda of Africa, what would that be? Susan, considering that you're starting the furthest away from Africa, what would that be?
Okay, well, first of all, in terms of trade, I mean, women in Africa are usually the backbones of the economy as SMEs and micro enterprises. So I think there's a need to focus on trade policies that impede women's progress. And, you know, one of the things I hear a lot is that what needs to be done is to address the issues to help informal traders. You know, the acute challenges that that come from cross-border trade, often from border issues such as sexual discrimination and harassment, gender bias, extortion, even ethnic-based discrimination. I mean, even limited gender considerations in sanitation facilities at the borders. I mean, you know, women come with babies. I mean, there's the whole issue of food security, if there's delays and you know, they're crossing borders, and so the food could be off then. And then this can lead to food waste, which ties into climate change. And so I think that there's a real need to educate and train border officials on gender sensitivity. Since, you know, women, you know, often lack the knowledge, and they also need protection when they're crossing the borders. So this kind of like gender sensitivity training, like downstream at the border and even upstream for policy officials. I mean, I think that when you're easing all of the trading, you know, within Africa, and then it opens up the doors to the world. You know, the product standards are upgraded, and women are then better able to tap into the global market.
Sensitivity is a massive thing, and from an informal trade perspective, it's so much that we have to start kind of unraveling it slowly but surely, but we can't keep on treating it as though it doesn't exist. So yes, absolutely, I agree with you. Caspar, what would be the one thing in the trade sector, trade agenda, that you would want to change? Caspar, you're on mute. Caspar.
Yeah, technology challenge. So yes, as I was saying, quite related to what Susan has brought up is from the experience we actually have is women are so much confined to cultural and societal patriarchal walls that sort of don't seem to be able to help at all in terms of promoting women in business or in trade. We are looking at so many things, and as working with the cooperative unions and societies, especially for smallholder farmers, quite clearly women are not found in the leadership role. They're actually not even included in the decision-making process. Businesses are being carried out by men, of course, at the expense, and yet the production process you'd actually find over 50–60% representation. Yet what they get back is nothing, because they don't own land, they do not own resources, but yet they spend most of their time and energy in the farms and all that. So one of the key things that we actually need to do is, again, get back into breaking that cultural, religious, patriarchal barriers, and that is a part of what we're actually doing. I mean, we carry out, we actually, for instance, at Fairtrade Africa, we have a program that's called, what is it called? It's called, basically a program that we developed to support women on certain coffee bushes. And then out of that, we supported them to come up with their own production chain. It's actually called Zawadi Coffee Women. Perhaps at a certain point, you'll find them in shelves across Africa. And this is, again, to show both men and women that if we worked on promoting women in business, eventually the what do you call it, the value is going to be felt across, not just among women. So this is one way of supporting through the process to ensure that the barriers are actually broken, and that they're able to now take part after the capacity that are actually able to take part in the trade throughout, whether it's cross-border trade, whether it's regional trade, and that they actually are present, they are actively participating in the process.
I hear you. I hear you. Active participation. Phylis, what is the one thing that you could change if you could?
Wow, thank you. Can you hear me now?
We can. Can you hear yourself?
Yes, now I have no feedback now, I'm sorted. So in my introduction, I talked about, I have the advantage of being a woman in business, but also have the advantage of working with policy makers and governments and private sector. So I get to have a bit of an advantage of seeing both sides. So I once attended a conference at the WTO, and this one statement caught me, came from Mukisa Kitui, Dr. Mukisa Kitui, and he said, it is interesting that when crossing the border from Kenya to Uganda, if it's a woman with a banana plantation on her head, she'll be harassed, she'll be told to pay this and that, and she's considered a smuggler. But a truck written X company crossing the same border is considered business. So that to me would be the one thing I would want to fix, because my Caspar and Susan, I think, have talked about probably the other two that I would have spoken about, but I would want to bring in that cross-border trade. So we're dealing with Africa trade. We have imaginary boundaries and real boundaries, but women experience them more. They experience them more intense. And Susan did allude to, sexual harassment, trade tariffs, non-trade tariffs, which, involves harassment and corruption. So if I would do one thing to fix that, I would digitize that entire process. Long time ago, we used to walk into the airport and you have to go to the teller and key in for, where the teller has the teller has the system. But now we can walk in, put your bags, check yourself in, and have a weighing system. If I could, I would digitize that entire process so that the women are able to, train them, and they're able to move their products along from Kenya to Uganda, to Tanzania, to Congo, to Burundi, without any harassment. And I think that digitization is critical. And maybe to help with that, to support with that, I would also put in what we call fulfillment centers across the countries in Africa. Fulfillment centers where if it's not a perishable good, then they can pre-send their products to that country, and then an organization from that particular country, whether it be DHL, whether it be a small player like Petty Errands, a smaller player like Petty Errands, can then ship within that country. That would help the digitization and the fulfillment centers. I would do that.
I agree. But watch the space. Remember, AI is coming into the world. So AI creates it removes the barriers to things like communication, language, illiteracy, etc. So AI is going to be the enemy of man, so to speak, from a harassment perspective. Shall we call it that and leave it there? We are almost halfway through our panel discussion, if you can believe it. Yes, exactly. I just want to make a call out, or do a call out to our audience. Please feel free to start populating the chat with your questions for our amazing panel. And I'm going to come back to you in terms of your questions. I'm just going to do a round of questions with our panel so that I can ask my questions first, and then we'll get you to ask yours. So I'm going to come to you, Caspar. The fair trade environment intrigues me. what is the percentage split, do you think, of, well, you know, we live in a non-binary kind of gender society, but from a woman perspective, what percentage split do you think? What percentage of your fair trade market in Africa or in East Africa, whichever you can answer for, is women? And is fair trade something women actually focus on? Like, and you know, if so, yes, you know, this is why. If not, why do they not? If they don't, but yeah, I'm very interested in understanding, you know, where does fair trade fit into the women agenda?
Thank you, Yavi. I think there are two things that I got to sort of try to clarify here. Is yes, I mentioned that we embrace the principles and values of fair trade. But again, just remember that fair trade as an organization is a voluntary certification organization. And yes, so a bit more specialized in supporting development through, you know, special kind of trade. Having said that, one thing that's also clear, and again, I mentioned it earlier, is that yes, the prices that are being sold under fair trade terms are slightly higher. There is an amount that comes back for social development. So you would actually find, you know, children or students that are actually, you know, going to school through the bursary from Fairtrade Premium. You'll find, you know, various sort of, you know, development aspects of the community that come in through Premium and all that. But apart from that, much more importantly is that the Fairtrade standards also provide for the, you know, produce organizations, call it, you know, cooperatives and all this, to build organizations that are more democratic and inclusive in the way they run and manage their affairs. And so the trade also includes the fact that women need to be involved in the supply chain. And I'm talking about women, but also youth are so much, you know, a focus as well. So the advantage of being part of fair trade system, particularly for women, is that they can actually see the value for them participating in the supply chain. And apart from that, of course, that they are recognized by the amount of resources and time that they put into the production process. And so, yes, so we are promoting that, and knowing that, of course, fair trade as an organization also has a strong focus on the more vulnerable part of the society. So women become our greater focus in the whole agenda, whether it's actually environmental issues, whether it's actually social issues, but participation of women is actually very key. And so in the South, particularly right now, we are really, really working hard. We have different programs that are working towards promoting women in business, very key, connecting them to the market. But before that, even the sustainable farming systems that we produce, we make sure that they're actually engaged in the process.
Oh, so it is something that you really focus on, and it seems like it is on its way to growing and becoming more of an issue with not an issue, but more of a focus area actually with your particular market.
Yes. Can I cut you short? That something you asked and I didn't mention is still, it's actually a little scandal that yes, we are talking about close to half or 50-60% of the, you know, women are involved in this, you know, in the oil production and value chain, but directly only 25% of women are directly involved in the fair trade. So this is something that we need to really, and we're making a lot of deliberate efforts to change and expand their you know, their direct involvement.
Okay, I see. You are wanting to do that. Susan, I want to use that as a segue, because you've been working on TFO Canada's projects for women in Africa to support capacity building for exporting. So what Caspar is saying is that, only 25% currently from a fair trade perspective is actually actively engaged and is working through it. So, for example, how has your projects, in terms of that support and capacity building for exporting, how has it allowed women to scale and grow their businesses? And what else has been the impact that you can tell us about in terms of some of these projects that you are busy with?
Okay, well, first I'll just give you some quick background about the two current projects that are operating in Africa. The first is Women in Trade for Inclusive and Sustainable Growth. It's a 5-year, multi-million-dollar project that focuses on sectors with high demand in Canada and with high employment potential for women. So that would be fresh fruits and vegetables, processed foods, home decor, footwear, cosmetics, and services. So TFO Canada works in partnership with trade support institutions in 24 countries, including 14 in Africa. And it aims to increase the representation of women in the leadership of these institutions, to strongly incorporate gender equality into their policies and programs, and then to increase the exports of women-led firms through capacity building approach, and doing things like bringing them on trade missions and market familiarization tours. So by the time the project wraps up in 2024, we will have trained about 15 trade support institutions in Africa, and over 3,000 women-led SMEs will benefit from the training to grow their businesses through exporting and, from increased sales. So as far as, all of the results, I mean, also there will be more women-led SMEs as members, clients, and leaders of trade support institutions. There will be more gender responsive institutions providing appropriate services to women-led exporters. With more, as I mentioned, more women participating in trade missions and establishing commercial relationships with Canadian buyers. And, in that whole project, about 15 million in export sales will be generated, and there will be a more balanced share between, women-led and men-led exporters. The second project is called Making Trade Work for Women in Sub-Saharan Africa, Lesotho, Uganda, Madagascar, and Ethiopia, to enhance the economic empowerment for women entrepreneurs. And specifically, it aims to help women-led exporters in the specialty, apparel, textile, fashion accessories, and home decor sectors to increase their exports to new markets. It is also enhancing the abilities of trade support institutions to support more women-led exporters with services.
Thank you, Susan. There seems to be quite a lot of work that you're doing in that space. And Caspar has a question for you, which I will, we'll address after Phylis's question. But there seems to be quite a lot in terms of the expansiveness of what you're doing. So I want us to unpack that a little bit more, but I'm going to come back to you to do that. Phylis, so Susan is, they're working on quite a vast range of things. You work a lot from a private sector perspective, and there's obviously challenges in terms of that. But what are some of these challenges that are experienced by women in trade in the private sector, and can they be overcome? And if they can, how easily can they be overcome? So what are we looking at in terms of those challenges and being able to overcome them in the private sector?
Thank you, Yavi. So your statistic you talked about earlier, you said women make up 58% of Africa's self-employed population. So there we go, massive opportunity. However, some of the challenges, and I'll go straight to the challenges, is very few of them are 51% business owners. They either are partners with less than 50%, or they are functioning in a leader management role. And now the masses, as Caspar alluded, the masses of women are now working at the, if it's a coffee plantation, they're picking the coffee, at the lower sections. So that's one of the big challenges. Second one is not every, if we find the pool of 51% businesses that are owned by women, fewer are working with the private sector. They prefer, you find that the business model they have selected is B2C, is business to customer. They're selling directly to the customer. It's safe, the customer pays on time. They are not necessarily engaging with private sector. The smaller is a percentage that's engaging with private sector. Why? Some of the reasons historically we know is because, number one, record keeping, which is something that we thank God for TFO Canada and all the other projects that are helping women to do this, to institutionalize their businesses. Record keeping, for example, pick any corporate, any private sector, they will require at least 1 year audited accounts, okay, to be able to adapt you as a supplier. So yes, corporates and private sector are trying to, bring in more women to come in as suppliers, but there's a gap. There's a gap that not enough women in business have audited accounts. Some of them are, actually most of them ask for 2-year audited accounts, which is very difficult to find in most of the women-led organizations, or women-owned, not women-led. Women-owned and women-led, okay? So then, of course, that speaks into financing. If we don't have enough record keeping, then the financing becomes an issue, because no bank, no financial institution will want to lend you if you cannot demonstrate at least 1 year of something, some solution. Some solution there could be M-Pesa or mobile money. If the governments in Africa can begin to really look at mobile money and say, all these women have mobile money accounts, they have M-Pesa accounts. Now they have what we call a pay bill or a buy goods, which means it's the accounts of the business. So if this could be adapted, then that would really help bring in maybe about 50% into the financeable mold, okay? And then my last point was, in terms of working with private sector, I just want to go a little ahead of myself just a bit, that women, having worked with some of the organizations and about 3,000 women in Kenya to get onto private sector, private partnerships. And when I say 3,000, we registered 3,000, but about only 20 of them managed to get into private sector. And these are the challenges that now I'm sharing. There's something called volume. For example, an organization, private sector, decides they want to bring in more women. They make a policy statement that we want 10% of our turnover to go to women, our procure and spend to go to women. Then we come in and bring in these women, and they go through all the hoops. Eventually they get certified. They become qualified suppliers. Now the challenge is, there's something we go deeper, we look into what is the volume and what is the value. Volume means, okay, so you've now adapted 20 more women into your pool of suppliers, and great, that is good. But then in terms of value, how much of that spend at the end of the year that was promised is eventually going to the women? And that's another level of hoops and walls and things that we have to jump, hop and scotch. As women entrepreneurs, as private sector organizations, we really have to begin to look into that. Yes, we can say we have this pool of women, but that's the volume. It doesn't relate into money. It doesn't relate for the women. So we need to look into the value of exactly how much, what are the percentages, what are we talking about? What is going into the women-owned businesses, right? So that's the last thing that I would want to mention. I could say more, but I'll give it up for the next session. Thank you, Yavi. I hope that that is clear.
No,
So
that's all very clear. Susan, Caspar had a question for you on the group, and I want you to pick it up with my next question. But he wanted to know, which part of Africa is your organization more present? And at the same time, or kind of as you answer that question, I want to understand how we can establish a more strategically beneficial partnership in terms of Africa and Canada. And, whether specifically for women or whether in general, how do we now start to drive that Africa-Canada trade partnership in a more heightened way, if we can?
Okay, so as far as our projects in Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and then our Women in Trade project, the WIT project. The first one I called the Loom, the Lesotho, Uganda, Madagascar, and Ethiopia. But the WIT project, there's actually 14 beneficiary countries in Africa. And maybe what I will do is after I finish answering this question, I can put those in the chat. And in terms of how do we establish more strategically beneficial partnerships? Well, I think such an important piece of that is encouraging collaborations. And I'm just going to tell you that in the last month in Canada, there were quite a number of summits with different countries in Africa. For example, I participated in ones with delegations from Ethiopia and Nigeria. And the Canada Africa Business Chamber was quite involved in these as well. And there's so much relationship building that goes on when these kinds of things happen, where people get to know each other, and it really then begins to enhance, two-way trade and investment. So I think that the more of these kinds of collaborations that can happen, the better. And, we want to ensure that more Canadian companies can go into Africa, and we want to provide, we need to provide the same benefits for African companies to access the Canadian market. So in all ways that Canada can support the enabling environment in Africa, for example, through the work, export readiness training that TFO Canada does. Another piece I think that can establish a more strategically beneficial partnership is facilitating the startup of the Organization of Women in Trade, OWIT chapters in Africa. There's a number that exist there already. And it's just been amazing how strong that they've become, and how interested other African countries are in establishing, these kinds of chapters, which then, they go on and they do not only training, but they do advocacy work. And the last piece that I'll talk about is that Canada has an emerging African strategy to increase trade and investment between, Canada and the many African countries. We're an aging country. Our population is aging, whereas Africa has a youth bulge. So, the Canadian government really wants tangible actions in this strategy to move the dial in strengthening trade and investment. Africa is not always on the radar for business and investment by Canadians. So, but now because of this emerging strategy, and we just see more people talking about this now, and bringing consultation and engagement from different areas. And this whole strategy has to be mutually beneficial.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's exactly it, is that it must be truly Africa-Canada partnership, so that it's not aid for Africa, it's how do we meet each other halfway with our relevant resources. So we've got a youth bulge, you've got an aging nation. How do we meet each other halfway? You've got Canadian dollars, we have land for investment, for example. So how do we meet each other halfway so that Africa is not always about receiving aid? Africa is also about how do we enter the trade agreement as partners in terms of what we have as resources. Caspar, has that answered your question?
Yes, Yavi, thank you. Yeah.
Cool. So while I have you, the AFCFTA is almost here, I like to say, because I don't want to say at what stage it is, because We are at effected. It's been effected. We are at protocols are being negotiated. Some of them are finalized. We are waiting for that final operationalization. Kenya, my brothers and sisters in Kenya and South Africa's borders are now, effectively open to them. So there was tea being moved from Kenya. And so we've done a little bit of stuff in terms of the AFCFTA. So it's almost here, but it's not fully operationalized as yet. With that agenda coming in terms of the operationalization of the AFCFTA, what types of products thrive in a fair trade environment from an Africa perspective in terms of intra-Africa trade under the AFCFTA? What products will thrive that are thriving at the moment? What products will thrive under the AFCFTA? And conversely, what products are not thriving and won't thrive under the AFCFTA? And how do we use women to be able to close some of those gaps? How do we unlock the potential, which is the assignment for the four of us to kind of get to? How do we unlock the potential for women to be able to close the gaps and address the challenges that you are finding from a fair trade perspective in terms of operationalization of the AFCFTA?
Thank you, Yavi. Yes, I two areas that I want to mention. One is that I think it was on the 5th of October that the Kenyan president flagged off consignment of tea export to Ghana for the first time. That was already quite positive. And that's already giving a signal of great opportunities that we actually have across. I personally do a lot of travels between here and West Africa. We have our counterparts there. And there is nothing as amazing as seeing that their interest actually on Kenyan tea and coffee as well. And so the unlocking of the opportunities is simply to just get on and make things work. That is at level one. Of course, I got to also make it sort of clear that right now in Kenya, we have Fairtrade certified wine from South Africa. That, of course, the South African producers started exporting already a year ago, and we are seeing it in the Kenyan shelves. That shows a lot of opportunities that, and I'm looking at it from the point of view that, if you look at it, for example, West Africa, you see that with the cocoa production, that the cocoa has to go to Europe for that to be processed and packaged and come back to East Africa or Southern Africa. We know that the opportunity is to have the value chain completed in West Africa is actually quite huge. And so we just need to make this happen. And I think that is where the women in trade need to come in a little bit more. And I'm talking about, of course, the mainstream products. I mentioned wine, I'm talking about coffee, I'm talking about tea and all that. And I started earlier on by mentioning that we started off a project that was looking at women in coffee, which now is actually well known as Zawadi. Zawadi means present or gift. And we're saying, we have a chance to promote women to find themselves able to engage in these high value products, mainstream products. We do not have to struggle to get them to the basics of informal business. We have a chance to support, create environment, enabling environment, but also promoting their ability, their capacity to engage at that level. And so that to me is what we need to do. That let us work together. Let us see where, for example, and I think that's actually what part of what we're doing, looking at the cooperatives that are producing coffee, tea, whatever, and see how much of the engagement we can promote for them to be able to also find themselves at the high level of business and trade.
Absolutely. I just want to go to a question that's on the Q&A, Caspar. Because it's exactly what you are saying, but I want you to expand on it. So Leone Ntaga says, Caspar, don't you think the cost of compliance is the reason for the slow uptake of fair trade certification women SMEs who are often in the informal sector, are there any subsidies, funds SMEs can access to help cushion the cost of compliance or technical assistance or preparation, funds to help them access the benefits of certification? And I know you will have the answer for me from a Fairtrade perspective.
Thank you. That's the so-called cost of certification. Yes, is always of concern. But I would actually take it from the perspective that if we had the market, then we would not have the problem, because the value for certification is actually much higher than perhaps what people actually fear. Right now, of course, we are struggling with searching and securing market for a much greater volume of certified products. And we know that once that is achieved, the cost of certification would actually be a non-issue completely. Yes, we know there are those small organizations or farmers that would like to get through into the standards. And this is where the collaboration with the like-minded organizations can come in. Where do we support the producers to be able to produce the quality that is expected within the standards? How do we ensure that the producers, the small producers, have, for example, aggregation center that can actually monitor and look at the compliance with the standards? So this is, it might not actually, and that's part of the reason this is important, collaboration and partnership. And I think Susan had mentioned it before, or you had actually asked that question, is that we may not be able to bear all the costs, but at the end, the amount of investments in terms of supporting and promoting producers eventually come back in good returns. So collaboration, partnership, but at the same time, searching for the market for sure. Once we get the markets with the volume that is required, then the cost of certification will actually not be an issue at all.
Sure. I also think that if we focus on the products that we have and we create excellence behind the products, even before it becomes fair trade, and if you go to then an investor to say, look, I'm doing amazing work, but I would like to now go into the fair trade space. Could you invest? There is a history there for even for an informal sector trader to say, you know, how, and it's about scaling. It's about wherever you are, what is the next step and what is the next little step and so on. You can't go from zero to hero in 5 seconds. Phylis, while we are on that topic, what would you say are the benefits to companies now in the private sector? Why should they, while we're talking about investment, and you know, it may not be fair trade, but what would be the benefits for companies? You're doing a sales pitch now. What are the benefits for companies in the private sector to invest more in women for the trade sector? So what would be the benefits to the companies? What would they get out of it if they invested in us more?
Wow, thank you. Thanks for that, Yavi. So I think I'll go with the most obvious, which is alignment to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which if you truly are a private sector that is global, that wants to put yourself on the map as being sensitive to the way the world is moving, to equality, gender equality, decent work, and economic growth, reduced inequalities that I've talked about, SDG number 5, number 8, number 10, number 17, which is partnership, you know, to meet goals. If you want to be a private sector that is really seen in this world to align to where the world is going, then you wanna give that opportunity to women-owned businesses. The second thing I would say is intrinsically, if you look at the way women do business, and please note, I'm not talking about 100%. You never lack an outlier, some outliers there that do business as usual, but there's reports of reduced corruption practices, substantially reduced corruption practices. As I said, not 100%, but you feel, when you look at the nature of a woman, the nature of a mother, the nature of a sister, corruption is something they want to put very far away from them, okay? So I can pitch that as a benefit that private sector will experience, that we won't need to go into, you know, cut this and cut that so as to get this and get that, okay? There's a Chinese proverb that says that women hold up half the sky. And another one that says, when you feed a woman, then you fed, when you give business to a woman, then you've fed the community, because immediately it goes to her daughters, her sons, her spouse. Immediately it goes to work in the home. So we have better homes, better living. And then intrinsically still, I would also want to talk about private sector has, most of the private sector we work with have what they call the corporate social responsibility. And it's almost like you have to decide as an organization what you want to impact and then create a foundation that does that. I want you to know, private sector members, that there are so many women-led, women-owned organizations that naturally give. And when I say give, for example, let me give an example. It's that they source for bids from, the local, we call them the women in the villages, is that they source for bids and attach it to their apparel and sell it internationally, globally. If you do the mathematics on the impact of that they are paid by this organization. I'm not saying men's businesses don't do that, but it's almost natural for women's business to do that. They're called social impact businesses. If you look at them very well, you're going to see very many women at the top. So those are some of the advantages. I could go on and on about the advantages about dealing with women, but let me talk about just those 4 or 5, and hope that we can get more organizations working with women in business.
No, absolutely, Phylis. I can see the passion. The passion came in right at the end. And we are actually we're over time. So I'm going to beg our host to kind of give us a little bit more time. But I just want to say in response to you is that it's not only the UN SDGs that, for obvious reasons, but remember Aspiration 6 of Agenda 2063, which is what we need to be owning more, speaks about relying on the potential of African people, especially its women and youth. And obviously, we are in the decade of the 2020-2030 decade of African women's economic and financial inclusion. So these are the things that we need to start driving, and we need to start talking, and that needs to become our narrative. You each have 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Wow, they're saying a few minutes more. So you have 60 seconds. You have 60 seconds to give me, out of everything that you said today, if there's one thing that people need to leave this particular session with, if there's one thing, or maybe it's something you haven't said today and you really, really, really feel that you need to say it, in 60 seconds, please tell us what would be the thing for you that is the most important thing to unlock the potential for women to trade sustainably from Africa in terms of Africa's future under the trade agenda. Caspar, 60 seconds, go.
Wow. So I'll make it quick, and I'm just going to pick it up from what Phylis had brought up in terms of SDG. And I would just want to complement that by saying that when we talk about social inclusion, we are talking about including women in business and trade. We are not asking for favor, because we are talking about producers. We are talking about engaging in like at Fairtrade, most of these are food items, and the world will always be fed. The world is just the recognition of the amount of time and energy and efforts that women put in work, in their work, and their potential. That to me is the most important thing that I would actually like to press even harder. That the world does not actually seem to recognize that potential, the ability, the resources, the time and everything that women put to work. So much more of, again, our concerted effort as we are in private, business practices, in development sector as we are, to just come together and create the world that has much more awareness of the circumstance. Thank you.
Thank you, Caspar. It was wonderful. Susan, 60 seconds. What is your burning issue?
Okay, I would say I think contacts are such a key to success in international trade. I mean, women are natural networkers. And so any way that we can bring women together, across countries, across continents to do this kind of networking, I think that's really when the magic happens. And I think the last thing I would like to say is that phrase that I think is so wonderful, which is an ounce of trade is worth a pound of aid.
I'm going to steal that.
Well, it's not mine. I've stolen it, so I allow you to steal it too.
I love that. Say that again. An ounce of aid. An ounce of
trade is worth a pound of aid.
I'm gonna take that. I'm owning that. Thank you, Susan. Thank you. Phyllis, I know that you were burning to say something else. So here we go, my dear.
Oh,
End
wow.
it for us.
In 60 seconds, all right? So Yavi, I just want to go back to what I'm really convinced about technology in Africa, being a real enabler. And I really appreciate your earlier point on we have to be careful about AI. But as we're being careful, can we be the AI? Can we be the owners, the innovators? Can we be the innovators of this system? Because it's coming anyway. I mean, Uber came and courted and dated customers in Africa. And by the time taxis were up I'm saying, no, Uber, it was too late. We're in love with Uber. Mm. Okay, and I recognize the power of such sessions, that we have ideas streaming, and so back to my idea, my one idea would be, can we own this AI business? Can we own the technology that then facilitates inter-Africa border trade? Can we? I think, yes, we can. So let's go out there, women, men, let's innovate, let's change Africa, let's have the digitized systems for ourselves, by ourselves, for Africa, by Africa. Baba, thank you.
A sister after my own heart, truly so. So I just want to end, I just want to say thank you to Anne. Thank you to Regal Africa Group for this amazing platform to have these discussions, and obviously for speaking about my two favorite topics in the world, which is women empowerment, or actually I prefer women inclusion, because we'll empower ourselves once you include us, and obviously the AFCFTA, which I apparently talk about in my sleep even. But I just want to end on this note, is that it's something I love to be able to say, is that the sisterhood began long before any of us created sisterhoods. Mother Nature blessed Mother Africa with riches on the African continent beyond anyone's wildest imagination. It is embarrassing for us that we have not been able to take what is in our ground, what we have been blessed with, and be able to turn it into the wealth that we should have done many generations ago. So it is now upon this generation and all of us around these tables to take that and make a difference, so that when we hand over as mothers of the next generation, to hand over a continent that is wealthy, and it is the Africa that we want. No more aid. Trade, not aid. Thank you so much, Anne, for everything. Thank you for the platform. Thank you for the discussion. I hand over back to you.
Wow, thank you, Yavi, for such a great moderation. Thank you, Phylis, Susan, and Caspar. That was a very engaging conversation, like reminding us about the potential of women in trade, and we're not leaving anyone behind. And everyone, women and men, will need to do that. So thank you very much for that. And we look forward to engaging with each one of your organizations as we continue empowering women to take up these opportunities, both on the continent and globally. So thank you very much. We really do appreciate you.